Gather round, dads, it's time for a tale. Hand me a book and a warm pint of ale. Let's discuss writing and the literary gods with Dan Roberts on the Dadlit Pod.
Welcome to the Dadlit Pod. My name is Dan Roberts. The Dadlit Pod is the literary podcast for those who know that there are 16 counties in our state: Cumberland and Franklin, Piscataquis and Somerset, Aroostook and Androscoggin, Sagadahoc and Kennebec, Lincoln, Knox and Hancock, Waldo, Washington and York, Oxford and Penobscot.
That
I'm
was good. Yeah,
joined.
that's impressive.
Thank you. I couldn't remember it. I had to look it up.
Mm.
Tonight I'm joined by author Kyle Farnsworth. Kyle is a teacher and educator from New Bedford, Massachusetts. His debut novel, Whalers, was a finalist for the Best Mystery and Thriller by the Kindle Book Awards, a finalist for the Best Debut Novel by the Independent Author Network. It has a damn fine cover, by the way, and was shortlisted for the Editor's Choice Awards by Reedsy Discovery. Kyle is an author and an educator. He was born in 1991 and grew up surrounded by the rich history and working class resilience of his hometown. Elements that deeply influence his writing. I can attest to that, having read it. He earned his BA in English from Bridgewater State University, who I used to run against, and he followed it up by a master's in teaching from Brandeis University. For the past decade, he's dedicated himself to teaching middle school English, spending 5 years in Newton, Massachusetts, before returning to New Bedford to teach in the community that shaped him. Kyle, thank you for coming on to talk about your new book, Medusa.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
And Medusa obviously has an under title, and I can't quite remember it. What is it?
So it's Medusa or Men Entombed in Winter is the full title.
Yes,
Yes.
Medusa, Men Entombed in Winter. For those who don't know, I opened the episode with the 16 counties in our state song because every Maine kid learns the 16 counties in our state song. And I had to look it up again because Kyle has a different county called Coldwater
A
County.
little bit of artistic license, right? We invented a small town and we invented a county. So I guess
It-
now there's 17.
it to be perfectly fair, I invented Bedford, Maine, uh, for my um, for my horror novel that I'm trying to sell, and we'll talk about that.
Mm.
And I invented it because, of course, it's related to Bedford Falls in It's a Wonderful Life,
Yeah, yeah.
and and people don't usually realize, but when a town is called something Ford, it usually means a person's name and a place to cross the river.
Mm.
So it was probably, so for example, New Bedford
Yeah.
was probably a family, the beds and the point in the river where people used to cross.
Yeah, there's a lot of New Bedford history in my debut in Whalers, right? I do like a big cataloging of the history of New Bedford, and that's really interesting that you brought that up because I don't know if I've ever really thought about the name as much as all the history that we have around here.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Massachusetts and Maine, both once the same state, both settled around the same time. So there's just a lot of rich history and folklore. One of the elements of that, of course, is religious extremism and the formation of cults, which
Mm.
your new book, Medusa, is about.
Yeah, that's always something that's really fascinated me, the idea of people sort of like latching onto an idea, so tightly that they would do anything for it. And I think a lot of the characters in this book, they latch on to Medi, not even necessarily like as a human being, but as this ideal that they want to live up to and strive for. And that, I mean, that leads to them doing some pretty interesting things as they travel north.
Yeah, what inspired you? If you'll allow me, I'll describe the book.
Sure.
Uh, Medusa, or Men Entombed in Winter, is the tale of a small cult that starts at Dartmouth College, surrounding a young woman named Medi, who has developed an interesting philosophy around personal application and personal values based on some dystopian novels that she's read. They then end up eventually settling in northern Maine and creating a cult where much of the book takes place from the perspective of a number of different characters involved in the cult. And it's a very interesting book, and I really love it. I love it for a lot of reasons. I love it because it sort of gives almost direct, it seems to be directly inspired by the Sarah Lawrence sex cult, which achieved a lot of attention, whereby this strange sociopathic person moved into his daughter's dorm room and then decided to become a life coach for all of her friends at Sarah Lawrence, leading to this kind of bizarre, exploitive sexual cult in New York City. And also, there's sort of what I saw as sort of a direct reference to some of the more extreme political movements that have recently emerged and in New England and were around in the past. Wilhelm Reich and his organ box business up in northern Maine, and I think most recently, the multi-billionaire left-wing thinker who has bankrolled Calla Walsh, for example. And I think there's a reference, and forgive me if I'm wrong, to Calla Walsh with one of the character names in the book.
So I would agree. Yeah. So there's a
Yes.
lot of little underlying references like that throughout the book. I'm really inspired, really interested in cult dynamics overall,
Yeah.
and I did a lot. I mean, I did a lot of research into different cults across America before and while writing this book. I can say. Like Wild Wild Country, the Netflix documentary was a big influence.
Yeah.
There is like a direct reference to that one as well. I think Waco is a big reference. Synanon, which was a like a drug rehab program that spiraled into a cult over in California. That's like directly where the idea of the game in my novel comes from. So I do think
Yeah.
I definitely sort of picked and choosed a lot of little pieces from a lot of different sources in regards to the cult aspect of it. But I also threw in a lot of my love of like classic literature as well.
Mhm. Yeah, there's a lot of classic literary references, which are really fun. And it entertains me because, and the reason why I know the 16 counties in our state song is because I grew up in Maine, and also went to college in Massachusetts, where I met many Calla Walsh type characters.
Well, it was interesting when me and you I first started following you and kind of keeping track of like who you are and what you like to talk about. I did like they always say when you're writing a book, you should picture like this perfect person that you're writing it for. And here's you with a podcast about dad literature, which dads are a big part of this
Oh,
book.
it's a huge part
Uh,
of this book. Yeah.
from right, living in Maine, school in Massachusetts. I was like, this guy, like I wrote this book for
Oh
him.
yeah, man. Oh yeah, and I immediately recognized a lot of the stuff in it because I'm a big cult guy.
Mm,
I I'm very enamored with the ideas of cults, and if you listen to the previous episode that I talk about with Christina Dalker, for example, she and I get into this discussion of cults.
mm,
And a lot of our discussion reminded me of this cult you envisioned. And I've become very aware. And the reason why I immediately picked up on the Calla Walsh and the funding of that sort of political cult was because, of course, she was the one who published the Zionist enemy map of Massachusetts,
yeah.
which immediately attracted attention because she was effectively blaming police brutality on Hebrew day schools where
Mm.
children were. And I was just like, this is not good. Uh, and then I became familiar with her, and she would go on to, she's uh, still under indictment for breaking into a technology company and has since fled to Iran.
I
So,
know.
for those who don't know, Calla Walsh was a small-time Dem political operative in Massachusetts.
Well,
Where
it
did
is
she go to
interesting.
school? Where did she, Northeastern or something
Yeah,
like
I'm
that?
pretty sure it's Northeastern. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me, just like the lengths, like the lengths that people will go when they believe wholeheartedly in
Oh
something. And
yeah, yeah.
I think that's the core of this book is like how far you would go if you really, really believe that my character of Medusa is making the right call, making the right decisions, doing the right thing for society as a whole. How far would some of these ordinary people go? And I think of like the character of Brandon Calhoun in this book as just a guy who gets wrapped up into it, puts all of his stuff in his car and drives up to northern Maine. Um, I think that's really where the heart of this book is.
Yeah, I mean it's a great book to the extent of because I've also known people who have been in cults, which is also an interesting thing. If you've met people who have been and subsequently come out of cults, and to them there's like an element of they'll largely be honest with you about it, and they'll be like, yeah, we were in kind of this weird a lot of the times it's high demand religions
Yeah.
where basically the you have an expectation from the perspective of money, or you have the expectation of you get love bombed and you have to separate from your family and all of these other things. And it's all to me very fascinating because I back in an earlier age I studied political extremism,
Mm.
and political extremism really interests me. And this is where my familiarity with people like Calla Walsh comes in. And if, for those who don't know, Calla Walsh is now a spokesperson for the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps.
Mm. Of all people, right?
Of all people.
Mm.
Like, I think like 4 years ago, she was, or no, it was a little more than that, probably 6 years ago, she was helping with Elizabeth Warren's Democratic campaign.
Yeah.
And she has since fled to Iran, where she's part of the sort of red-green ideological alliance. And a lot of people really struggle to understand how that type of thing could manifest itself. But if you've like looked at people over time, if you looked at the way these things come out historically, it's actually relatively easy to see where it exacerbates and where it becomes the state of affairs. And I think you did a really good job representing it in Medusa.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think that like across all my research and across, I mean, hours of documentary footage going into this book, I think across all of my, you see a lot of commonalities, like whether it's like
Oh
David
yeah.
Koresh or it's Synanon or it's the Rajnapuram in Oregon. It's the
Yeah.
love bombing, it's the isolation, it's like the desire to belong is so fascinating to me. Like the
Well,
desire to be a
yeah.
part of something that's bigger than yourself that could, I mean, lead you down a rabbit hole that you don't know how to get out of.
Yeah. Well, it also lets you turn off, I think, something in your mind, right? Like
Yeah, that's very interesting.
you get to turn off uh struggle.
Yeah.
Like struggle becomes directed. And to that extent, you know, the world around you narrows.
Mm,
And instead of seeing like what is my real pursuit of meaning? Is it having a family? Is it being successful? Is it writing a book? Is it building a house? Is it a career? Instead, what you get is, well, adhering to these ideals makes me perfect within this group and makes me esteemed within this group of people. And as long as I don't go outside this group of people, this is why they need to be reintroduced to society because the values become adjusted. The history of the world becomes adjusted. The reality of the way people interact, psychosexually becomes adjusted.
right, yeah,
And
I think that's what the character of Medi is really looking for in a lot of this
oh
book
yeah,
is
yeah.
somebody to appreciate her for who she is. And like, with no spoilers, you get pretty deep into her backstory and learn about like why she is on such a quest, right, to belong. And you make a great point. The smaller you make that circle, the easier it is to fit in and be perfect and honestly lose your own identity in the process.
Yep.
Um, so yeah, no, very very interesting when you think about how by shrinking your world, it's a lot easier to be who you want to be.
Yes. Well, but beyond that, to be who other people want you to be,
Mm,
right? The expectations are limited to what the small group desires, right?
right.
For example, a person who runs for Senate of the United States has to weigh not just the in-group dynamic, but the evolving needs of everybody, in addition to their own relationships with their family, their relationships with other people. But if you're running for, guy who guards the food at the cult, your instructions are relatively simple.
It's easy to do a good job at it,
It's
and
easy
it's
to
easy
do a
for other
good
people to
job.
tell you, yeah, you're doing great. We love having you
Yes.
here.
And any privations or losses you suffer, um, even when you demonstrate personal excellence, make more sense,
Mm,
right? Because they can either be contributed or attributed to communal losses, or alternatively to some emerging failure that you as an individual have demonstrated within the evolving structure of the cult, which is so fascinating. This is why I loved your book. You 100% wrote it for me, and it delighted me, set in my home state, and where guys like Wilhelm Reich, I'm sure you did Wilhelm Reich, right?
yeah. Oh yeah.
And
So
I think
there's yeah.
I think you have a reference to him as well.
I don't know if I have a direct reference. I'm trying to think.
Yes.
I don't believe I have a direct reference, but I do. That was definitely on the list of inspirations.
Yes. Well, Wilhelm Reich, for those who don't know, was a student of Freud and Jung who decided that when an individual orgasmed, they achieved a sort of psychic energy that exceeded normal existence. And what he did was he came to the conclusion that if you built a box where a person went and orgasmed in, they're called an organ box, that they could communicate across planes in this enlightened state. And the the federal government prosecuted him for mail fraud
Yeah,
because
with
he
good
was
reason.
selling, yeah, with good reason, because he was sending these boxes through the mail. But you can go out to Western Maine in like an area or a community similar to that which you've represented in this book, and you can find his old house and a museum dedicated to his work, and sort of similar to Medusa in a lot of ways, almost like a cult following that he had.
Well, that's why Maine was such an interesting it's such an interesting setting for me to put this cult into. And obviously there was a lot of thought goes into when you're writing a book like this, well, where's the ideal location? And I think I
Hmm.
do have like a little stretch somewhere towards the end of part one in this book where Medi does think to herself about like where should I take all these people? She thinks about
Hmm.
going to Louisiana, she thinks about going to California, but there's something about northern Maine, like that open frontier, the wilderness, it feels like a place that like hasn't really been claimed by somebody like her, that she feels like she could go up
Hmm.
and really stake her claim there. Um, and of course, all these kooky backstories from guys like him are a big part
Oh
of that as
yeah,
well. Yeah.
or the Shakers, for example.
Mm.
The Shakers were another millenariist evangelical cult that became they were celibate, and the state let them run orphanages, and they used to reconstitute themselves by a couple of the orphans sticking around and continuing on the tradition of the Shakers. But when the state took the orphanage away, now there are only two of them left. And they live up on a farm in the middle of nowhere in Maine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was the initial like the initial idea was, well, if there's this little farm town or this little place with 30 people up in northern Maine and we took 50 college students there, how much damage could they do? And I really
Oh,
think that was the jumping off point for the writing of this.
unimaginable
Yeah,
damage.
as we saw in the book, right?
I was going to say, if you've looked into the fish concerts that used to take place at Pease
Yeah.
Air Force Base back in the old
People will
days.
show up for fish, that's for sure.
Oh, yes, yes. I remember driving through northern Vermont on my way to Montreal in like the middle of the night, and Fish was playing. And instead of finding parking lots, people just parked on the side of the road on the highway.
And I'm sure
Uh,
it's quiet enough that you could just listen, right?
yeah, and just miles and miles of cars just parked on the side of the road, which begs the question of why Fish would host all these concerts out in the middle of nowhere. But I think you and I both know the answer. It's so that people could use drugs without the presence of police.
It's like there's something about the isolationism of it, right? Like you're with
Yeah.
other people, but you're almost in your own little world. It goes back to our conversation earlier about when you shrink your circle, right? It becomes a lot easier to
Oh,
be who
yeah.
other people want you to be. And a little draw of going all the way up there is, yeah, you have your however many people, but you're really, really cut off from the rest of the world. And I think that's where the inhibitions start to fly.
Oh, yeah, clearly, as you represent in the book. And I mean, I think one of my favorite parts of the book, I hope you don't mind if I bring this up,
No, not at all.
is the sort of idea of your main protagonist goes in and out. He has almost what approaches the closest to a normal relationship uh, that occurs in the book. And and he goes in and out to his parents. And I think it's interesting because, and this is where the dadlit portion comes in, where I think that you've accurately presented it as dadlit. Um, he is very affected and carries on the underlying values of duty and decency that his father imparted on him, which he tries to apply within the cult, not realizing that those values have disappeared. And I think that's a really dynamic way to show a conflicted person. I really like that you did that. You want to just describe what inspired you to emphasize the dad as the value keeper or the value extender?
Yeah, and so it almost goes back to what we were saying about how most cults, the number one thing that they want to do is they want to isolate you from your family, right? They want to make you forget about who you are and where you came from. And it was really interesting with Peter and his father Frank to kind of play on the ideas that he never forgets the things he learned from his father, but a lot of the things that his father taught him, like these values, like you said, like duty, like honor, in a way he misinterprets some of them and applies them the wrong way. Now, one of my favorite aspects, speaking of this blizzard that I'm caught in, like one of my favorite aspects of it is this idea that his father tells him that like, well, we're lucky that it snows around here because like that's the cost of living in a place as beautiful as New England, right? You got to deal with the snow a couple times a
Mm,
year. But then that leads him out to northern Maine in this cult where it's always snowing, but he thinks that that isolation, that being frozen and entombed, as is in the title of the story, he sees that as a good thing, like being stuck
mhm,
here, being stuck in the snow, being stuck in the wilderness, and the idea that he doesn't want to leave because of loyalty and honor and duty, and he interprets what he has from Medusa as love at first sight, right? Like
mhm.
my dad would have done this for my mom, so I'm going to do it for her. And where that leads him is obviously not a pretty place.
Yeah, there's an element of susceptibility, which I think goes back to the comparison with the Sarah Lawrence cult, where having like some normal kids who have lived their lives in relative stability, um, and might not have been exposed to charlatans, or might not have been exposed to histories of violence, or might not have been exposed to sort of the dangers of extremism in religion or extremism in politics, which, by the way, is a thing that I recognized when I was at college, because I went to college at Clark University, which I
Mm.
don't suggest anyone ever go there, by the way. I'm one of these people who, if I was a football player, I would announce myself as an alumni of my high school.
Yeah, yeah. The Monday Night
South
Football
Portland
pregame,
High.
you'd say, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
know a
Dan
man in
Roberts.
elementary school.
Dan Roberts, offensive line, South Portland High School. You know, but there was an element of like people believed that they were walking into, or that while they were in college, that they needed to recreate the 1960s for their lives to have meaning. So, sort of that they needed to approach everything as if it was the Vietnam War. They needed to approach everyone as if they were Richard Nixon. They needed to approach, everything as if, we all need to be out there trying to establish a collectivist farm and make it work as soon as we got out here. And that was my college experience. I was surrounded by people that was their shtick. That was what they were all about. And, uh, and there was no recognition that like there was an element or the ability to exploit that naivete
Yeah. Well,
almost.
and college is a really interesting time in a person's life because a lot of the time this is your first time leaving home, right? This is your first
Yeah.
time sort of establishing your own identity, meeting a whole bunch of new people. And I oftentimes feel like when you're 18, 19, 20 years old, you're thinking to yourself, I got a way better idea on how to do things than my parents do. Right?
Oh
Like
yeah. And that's
I have a world that I've envisioned that I think is probably going to be significantly better than the world that my mom and dad lived in. All I need to do is make it happen. And I think a
yeah.
lot of times it's right. It's that naivete. It's the susceptibility that, I mean, if that drive and that ideal falls into the wrong hands, it's really easy to get exploited, like you said.
Oh yeah. Uh, and particularly because the entry into the college experience opens you up to a lot more freedom and range of
Mm,
ideas. But as I think you and I would both agree, there's a certain amount of ideological capture in post-secondary education. I mean, you don't have a lot of Milton Friedmans teaching
mm.
economics these days. Uh, and to that extent, I worry, and one of these things that I've become like acutely aware of is that the rudiments are being ignored for the reaction, right? So
Right.
the sort of like, what are the building blocks of government? Let's start with Locke and Hobbes. But Locke and Hobbes get skipped, and all of a sudden we have Latin American politics, and we talk about liberation theology, and we talk about the Padrone system, and we talk about American intervention, and we talk about injustice and third worldism. But the principle of what exactly the policies are trying to accomplish get kind of ignored. And it's odd. It's odd.
Well, it is also like it's also interesting that like I think people on a lot of these college campuses are reading a inordinate amount less than like you or I were reading like when we were in
Yeah.
college. Right? They're just not reading books like I feel like reading books was my life. It has been my life.
Mm.
I feel like nowadays like there was a great article. I think it was man, I might have been in the Atlantic. It was about the crisis, the college students who can't read full-length novels. And it was a deep
That's
dive
crazy.
into these ELA teachers on college campuses that were assigning, assigning a novel every 2 weeks, and their students, their freshmen, their sophomores were coming to them and saying, like, I just can't keep up with this reading load. Like, I think I need to drop English 101. Like, I can't keep up. And I think a lot of the ideas that are sort of like instilled throughout our society through books and through literature, that they're kind of dwindling on a lot of these campuses because like students just aren't reading books anymore.
Yeah. The that's interesting because you, of course, are an educator,
Mm,
though you're a middle school educator. What
correct.
are
Yes.
are you doing it from the approach of full books, geared towards middle grade and teen fiction, or are you doing it with the textbook approach, where it's kind of like stories broken out into the textbook?
So great question. I just recently actually moved from public school to prep school,
Oh,
which was a massive change, right?
I bet.
So when I was in public school, everything that we read was on the shorter side. And even to the point where like short stories were almost too long sometimes for some of my middle
Mhm.
grade students. I would give you something that's say like 12 pages and they'd be, oh my God, this is way too long because that was all we would really do was we would read short fiction, short stories, poetry, because that's what they have on standardized tests, right? Nobody's
Yeah.
reading The Outsiders on their standardized tests, right? They're reading a short story and answering questions about it. And a lot of the times that's what we would read. Now that I've gone to prep school, that's sort of done a little 180 now where we're putting an onus back in reading full length novels and that reading experience that I felt like was missing in the public schools quite a bit. Because
Mm.
I just did The Outsiders, right, with my seventh graders, right? You want to talk about a book that boys are really going to latch onto is a book like The Outsiders. But in the public school, we didn't have those moments where, oh my God, we all read chapter 12 for homework and the hallways are buzzing the next day because of, all of the spoilers. I don't know if I could spoil The Outsiders on this
No, no, no.
podcast, but
The Outsiders is so funny because I read that when I was in middle school too.
incredible book.
And it's an incredible book. And I have a friend who's a PhD and he's a professor of Holocaust and genocide studies. And he went to the Outsiders musical
Oh,
in New York City, and he goes, "Oh my God, I just saw this amazing musical," because he and I like to talk about plays, and because he's a big musical guy, and my wife and I really love going to live theater. And he goes, "Oh, there's this musical called The Outsiders." And then I'm like, "Oh, the one with Pony Boy?" And he's like, "It just came out. How did you see it?"
that's
I'm
incredible.
like, it's a book for teenage kids.
We with my boys, I always tell them, right? So we're gonna read The Outsiders. I promise you, we'll like watch the movie at the end. I'm like, we're
Yeah.
gonna read it first, and then we can watch the movie. It was so funny. They're like, oh my God, that's the guy from Cobra Kai. I'm like, that's the guy from the Karate Kid, which is in turn the guy from Cobra Kai,
Yeah, it's
and
the
they
guy from
recognize
Cobra
like
Kai.
Rob Lowe from like Parks and Recreation or something. I'm like, it's
Yeah.
Rob Lowe. Um, yeah, it is an incredible movie, but I think that's what like speaking why I love Dad Lit Pod so much is like my prep school is all boys. We need more
Yeah.
books that cater to boys and to dads,
Yeah.
right? Because I feel like a lot of the publishing industry right now is sort of headed in a different direction where I don't know if like a book
Mhm.
like The Outsiders, S.E. Hinton, right? Female writing her first book about a bunch of boys that have gang violence with one another. Like, does that book get published in
Yeah.
2026?
Well, I
Like,
mean,
I'm
gang
not sure if it
violence,
does.
what, circa the 1950s,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, I mean, like thinking about contemporary books for a middle school audience, right? That would be applicable. You think about like Gary Paulson's Hatchet,
Hmm.
to refer to my home state of Maine, Lost on a Mountain in Maine, the Don Fenler story, which
Yeah, I
is
don't know if I've read
actually
that one.
it's actually a true story written by a journalist. So Don Fenler fell off. He was on a scouting hike on Katahdin, and he fell off the knife's edge and disappeared into the woods for, I want to say, 12 days.
Hmm.
And they finally found him in a cabin in the middle of nowhere. It's funny, I've had to refamiliarize myself with this because I'm interviewing Kat Rosenfield, who has another Maine book that she just wrote about the 100 mile Appalachian Trail in Maine. And I think about like books for boys um during during that zone. And I mean like R.L. Stein, I guess. But other than that, like I don't know who's writing them for boys at this point. What do you have on the list at
So,
the prep school?
so for my younger guys, like you just said, we'll do Hatchet, of course,
Yeah.
right? For my some of my older guys, a really great book I love doing, And Then They Were None by Agatha Christie, which is a
Hmm.
great murder mystery. That's a book that boys will really sink their teeth into.
Yep.
Um, and I also love we do Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry by Mildred Taylor, which is an awesome book that they really enjoy. And then as you get older, that's when you start to get into like Lord of the Flies territory. You start to get into
Hmm.
like To Kill a Mockingbird territory, Night territory for
Yeah.
some of the old for like that's for the eighth graders. But yeah, it's really hard when you're looking for a book that's gonna like capture the attention of a 11, 12, or 13-year-old boy.
Yeah, I think that's interesting that you use night instead of like Daniel's story. Because Daniel's story, for
Mhm.
example, is a fictional version. Night obviously being Elie Wiesel's representation of it. His experience. I read Daniel's story. I've actually never read the Diary of Anne Frank, personally, even though I'm a
I think I read
Holocaust
that in high
scholar.
school. Yeah.
Yeah, it goes up in high school.
Yeah.
I read a lot of books. I was very fortunate, um, when I was in high school to get a very novel heavy, um 4 year experience, in high school, capped by a course which was called Struggle for Meaning when I was
Mm.
a senior in high school. And it was half history, half English. And it was taught by two teachers. And we read some great stuff. We read, Cry the Beloved Country. We started with Antigone. We went all through, and we had just such a great list of books, that were really fun and really dynamic.
It's a really
And
interesting model that I wonder if more schools should think about replicating, right? Because if you have one, two teachers is pretty awesome for a high school, but also to have a history course that coincides with novels, like with novel study,
yes,
that's how you really get the synapses firing, and that's where all this stuff really starts to stick, right? This like cross-disciplinary reading is super important, I think, like in any English class, right? Like we try our
oh
best at our
yeah,
school to try to connect. Like if I'm doing a nonfiction reading about a scientist, like you better believe we're having conversations with the science team first and saying, hey, how can we cross pollinate? Um, 'Cause I really think that's how you get the stuff to stick.
yeah. I mean, it's, what do you call it? It's the, like a teaching opportunity to magnify a moment, or shit. I forget what it's referred to. I'm currently writing a horror novel about a high school vice principal and guidance counselor, and I've gotten very into the high school lingo, like
Mm,
ADR, like alternative dispute resolution,
mm.
and all the equity language and that sort of stuff.
Oh yeah, so you're sinking your teeth into the educational lingo, huh?
Well,
Whew,
I
good luck.
almost, I almost took your path. I
Yeah.
almost did what you did. But I couldn't do it. I was like, I had gotten my master's in history, and I went into, and they wanted me to get another master's, and the amount of money for the outlay, for the certification in the state of Maine, and there was only one program in the state of Maine.
Well,
And the outlay for that program over 2 years, while you are learning and doing in-class
like
work,
student teaching. Yeah.
student teaching, you're doing classes, you're doing student teaching, you're not getting paid, it's all on your dime. And to me, it was like, this is not 60 grand that I want to eat.
And what a moneymaker, huh?
Oh yeah, I mean, the University of Southern Maine was raking in the dough
Oh yeah.
on that. And it was
And it
all late career people who had, like, who'd gone through careers and decided they wanted to get into teaching. And it's like the idea that they're going to charge these people 60 grand plus living, right? You have to live and exist, and you can't have a job because you're doing 60 hours a week of
Well, and yeah,
school and like also that they could walk into 26, 27K a year back then. It was like, this is insane. Can't
yeah,
do it.
I did a for my master's degree, which was my educational degree. I did a 13 month program through
Hmm.
Brandeis University, which I did because 13 months like let me get in and out, like let me get that
Yeah.
degree and then let me get into the field. But really it was like educational boot camp, and it was exactly what you're describing, right? You're waking up,
Yeah.
you're doing student teaching all day. And then after your student teaching, you're going to your classes. I'm going over to campus. I have homework. I have all these things to do. And again, I had to live. So I'm living in Boston at the time, trying to pay. I think it was like $2,400 worth of rent.
Yeah.
And I talked to one of my guidance counselors at Brandeis. She said, "Hey, I'd like to set up a meeting with you on Saturday." I said, "I can't do Saturday. I was delivery driving at the time." I said, I'm working. I got a delivery drive from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m." She goes, "Like you can't have a job and do this program." And I'm like, "Lady, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Like I got to pay rent. I got to pay for groceries."
Yeah,
But
man.
I just worked a double on Saturday and a double on Sunday, and then we just did it all over again the next week. So yeah, it
Yeah.
is a commitment. It's a grind.
It is I'm glad you said that because I was looking down the barrel of it and I was just like, I've quit very few things in my life, but I 100% walked away from that and I don't regret it. It didn't make any sense. I could envision doing something like Teach for America,
Mm,
where it's a 3 month, program of getting you run up for a certification, then placing you for like a 2 year period and you getting paid while you're teaching. But this idea that America has a teacher shortage while it creates this, what is basically like I would call it like a welfare fund for small and state university teaching colleges is crazy to me. So crazy. And the amount of
yeah,
money that you have to
and
lay down for
I
that,
think
so crazy.
well, too, and not just for the schooling as well, but I also think for all the licensure, like your license that
Oh yeah.
expires every 5 years, that you have to put another $250 into it just to reinstate it. And then in Massachusetts, I don't know what you guys have in Maine, but in Massachusetts we call the MTEL, right? It's your Massachusetts test for licensure.
Hmm.
And some of those tests are extremely difficult. Like I know a lot of people that are teaching middle school, like if you're trying to teach middle schoolers math, you're teaching sixth graders like multiplication, like multiplying fractions. And then you go
Hmm.
take the MTEL and you're doing like advanced calculus, and they're telling you you need a 65 or else you do not pass and you got to take it all over again. Next thing you know, you take it 4 or 5 times, you're over $1,000 in the hole just trying to get that license that you need to work the job to get paid.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not easy, and definitely not.
Yeah, they really, well, they, let's just say it, they just don't make it easy for normal people.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, true. Yeah, exactly. That
You
was my
know?
that was my thought when I was at Brandeis doing my 13-month program, and they asked me like, "How are you working?" I'm like, "Well, I'm not living at my parents' house. I'm just an average guy just trying to get by here. So I got a
Yep.
delivery drive on the weekends."
Yep. Yep. Oh man. Well, that was brutal, I'm sure. Like I said, I got about a month in. We had a bunch of weird sessions that I really like. We sat down and they were like, you all need to buy a laptop. And I'm like, I need a laptop? Like, why didn't anyone say this? You all need to buy a laptop. You all need to take out extra money for your personal living expenses on top of what you're paying in, contributions to this program.
Hmm.
And on top of that, you got to anticipate that you're going to be doing, 60 hours a week with the classroom stuff. And I was just like, this is nuts.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And it's definitely hard. And for me, I felt so fortunate to have found a program that was 13 months because I mean,
Hmm.
the way that my brain works, I'm like, it's going to be extremely hard, but I can do anything hard for 13 months, you know.
Yeah.
A year goes by and then it's over, right? And I think ever since, I think that teaching has given me a lot of opportunities to like work on my writing, right? In the summertime,
Hmm.
right? I get a lot of like vacation time, right? I don't know if I'd be able to have written two novels in the last 2 years unless I had a job that gave me that opportunity. And I
Yeah.
think that was definitely something that I played that was in the back of my mind when I decided to go into teaching was this is going to give me an opportunity to work on my writing, to work on my craft, and hopefully put out something like Medusa. And here
Yeah.
we are.
Well, let's talk about your writing, because Whalers has a beautiful cover that really fascinates me.
Yeah, thank
I
you. Yeah.
obviously haven't read it yet, but I've read Medusa, and Medusa's fabulous. Really as good as anything I've read from people I've interviewed that come from Big Five presses.
I
And you
appreciate that.
did that all yourself.
Yeah. And
Uh,
that's something I'm very proud of is just doing
you
it
should be.
entirely on my own, right?
You should be proud of it. It literally I read Medusa and I was like, this is so fantastic. And I'm one of these people who's on the fence because I was able to con an agent into representing me on a book, which is next to impossible.
Yeah.
And by the way, she doesn't want to rep any of my other books. She just wants to rep one of my books. And um and I was like, Medusa is so good. Like, I love this book. I think it's really dynamic, it's interesting, it's thrilling. It hits on like all of these things that I'm really interested in. And I reached out to you and I said, Kyle, like, who's the publisher on this? And you said, me. I'm
Hmm.
self-publishing it. And I have to say that was a real inspiration to me. That gave me sort of a measure of confidence to be like, oh, then if Kyle is able to produce something this quality, and I hope you don't mind, I tell everybody that they should check it out
Oh, not at
whenever I
all. You
engage with
you tell
people.
everybody.
Yeah, yeah. Um, it said to me like, why, like, do I need these like outside parties to produce something of quality that's interesting? And so obviously I haven't read Whalers. I have read Medusa. How long did it take you to come to the conclusion that as a dad-lit author who writes stuff that I really like and that other people really like? I mean, I've everyone who's read this book has said like, I'm really into this book, and you've got a bunch of people that you're going to be doing interviews with. What was the process that you went through to the point where you just said, fuck it, I'm going to do this myself?
So yeah, so I know it's interesting, right? Because like when I was writing Whalers, which was first, I didn't know as much, I think, about the publishing process as I would like to think I did, right? I obviously knew
Hmm.
what literary agents were, I knew what the big publishing houses were, but the idea of like writing a Curie letter was something that was brand new to me at the time. Um, and I would say when I first started pitching that book, like I was throwing the hook out, the bait, the fishing line, and I wasn't getting any nibbles whatsoever. So with
Hmm.
Whalers, I beat my head against the wall for a couple of months, but then ultimately, kind of, at least for me, I'm like, I just want to write a book. Like I just want my book to be
Hmm.
out there for people to read. Like I put all this time and effort into it, Why am I going to just like leave it on my laptop? Like I want people to read this, so I
Mhm.
self-published it. And then when I started writing Medusa, that's when I feel like I really knew the ins and outs, not only of like how to put together a compelling novel, but also how to query, how to look for agents, uh, basically where to find all of my resources. I had already done that. And when I first started putting Medusa out, again, not a nibble. So I
Yeah.
think my last ditch effort was I went to a writing conference in Boston. It was called the TBR conference, and they had tried to do something very interesting where they called it the publishing matchmaker. And they said, listen, we know you guys are sick of beating your head against the wall and reaching out to agents. Send us your letter, sample chapters, and we're going to give it to all of the agents that are coming to this conference. And if they're
Mhm.
interested in reading more, they'll reach out. Sounds
Mhm.
awesome. Right. So I pitched that out there. I'm going to this conference. I was very excited. And then when I got an email back that just said, yeah, we're sorry. We regret to inform you that there are no agents that are interested in meeting to talk about Medusa. When that happened, like you and I, we talked about this via DM for a little bit. I was like a little Bill Belichick where I was like, okay, well, watch this then. Like I will put this
Yeah.
out myself. I will do all the ARCs. I will get my cover made. I will publish it through Amazon, and I'm gonna blow this thing up just to show you that like I don't need your approval in a way. And that's sort of where I'm at with both of my books, that like I don't really need somebody to be like, "Hey, here's the validation of like I'm going to be your agent." When like I'll just put them out there myself and people will read them and hopefully they enjoy them.
It- I love it because the reason why I've refrained from self-publishing to this point is that my wife does not want me to spend the money on an editor.
Mm. I
Which
I
I
was fortunate.
understand. Which I
Yeah, I
understand.
was fortunate enough that I when I first started when I was writing Whalers and I didn't really know the ins and outs. I found
Yeah.
Reedsy and I found an editor through Reedsy that I just developed a really good working relationship with, who really loves both of my books. And I can tell I've talked to her on the phone for hours about both of these, and just having her at my
Mhm.
back was really inspiring. And then I think after
Yeah,
working with
who
her, I'm like,
is
I can do
she?
this.
Who is she? Just so that
So her name was
people,
Jenna Love Schrader.
yep. And you can find her on
Yeah, Jenna
Reedsy.
Love Schrader. You find her on Reedsy. Yeah, she's spectacular. And I will say she put in a lot of work to like the developmental edits of my book, right?
Hmm.
A lot of these really interesting ideas, like for Medusa, it was her idea. She was like, "Hey, what if you have her hair just like grow longer the more powerful she becomes?" Like little things like that. I'm like, "That's
Hmm.
brilliant. Like what a great idea." And then a lot of like the proofreading and copy edits, I do myself. I read through it as diligently as possible. You saw my first cover, I'm sure, my first copy of it, that I just read and I red pen it, and you know when it's ready, it's ready.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna be honest, I'm so impressed. And obviously I've directed it to numerous people. It's funny. I just think about because I read a lot now, right? Obviously, doing this podcast. And it goes beyond just reading what people send me. Like, I'm very interested in what does sell, in what does make it through. And Medusa, to me, is a terrific, like, crime. Um, what do you call it? It's a literary thriller that is, high concept, that's beautifully written. And it's so weird to me. Like when I first started reading it, I legit thought that it had come from a literary press. I thought that you had sold it to a literary press. And for those who don't know, authors end up doing 90% of the marketing anyway, even if you sell to a press. So you just
Hmm.
assume that you're going to do the marketing. And I was like, man, this is so good. And I was just thinking, who published this? And then I reached out to you and you were like, oh, I did.
Mm,
And
mm.
I was like,
No, yeah,
well, Kyle Farnsworth
yeah,
apparently is
published by Kyle Farnworth. Yeah, exactly.
published by Kyle.
Mhm. Yeah,
Medusa
like,
by Kyle.
and
Which
yeah,
which comes back
I
to I don't know if you've ever listened to my like where do you find the literary man episode of the Dadlit pod, but this is 100% what's happening across the board with guys like you, John Duffy, Craig Turleson, Coy Hall. I'm trying to think of other people that are doing this right now. It, it's those are a bunch of people that I read, and it's like you can't get agents,
yeah.
you can't get publishers, and all of the works are high concept. All of the prose is sophisticated and interesting. All of the stories have male protagonists, and to that extent, like, why can't I find these on the bookshelves? You know
Well,
what I
and
mean?
for me, it was like for me, I know what I like. I like to write what I like to read, right? Like
Yeah,
I like male protagonists. I like literary. I like books that make me think about what it means to be a human being, right? Like
yeah.
that's where I like to that's where my bread is buttered, right? And I know that's what I like. I have no idea what a lot of these agents like. Like I send it out and like I said, I haven't gotten a nibble. Like I
It's
see
so
people on
insane.
Twitter that's like, oh my God, I just got my third full request. And I'm like, well, evidently like they're writing something that these agents are interested in like Medusa or Men Entombed in Winter, like they're not into Medusa.
I
And
just think it's so funny. It's so funny because like I it, I approach this entire thing from like learning first. It's all learning first. So when my agent says, "Look, you're too slow to get to the inciting incident. In the future, this book is not going to work. In the future, you need to get to the inciting incident faster.
mm,
And if you want to do genre, you have to get to the inciting incident faster." And to me, it seems so unnatural because if I read that, it 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 would feel false to me, right? It would
yeah,
feel sort of, whereas Medusa, for example, has a fairly has an opening that has an element of mystery, and the underlying inciting incident for the protagonist is this developing relationship that just sort of emerges
hmm
in the early chapters, which is interesting. It's interesting and dynamic to have a character head in the direction of what he perceives as love, but is ultimately exploitation. And to define a single moment where a decision is made in that regard just doesn't work.
yeah.
But at the same time, I would never argue that your book lacks an inciting incident, right? I
Well, yeah,
mean,
yeah. No, I would totally agree. I think for me, like my inciting incident was just the fact that I decided to start chapter one in the future, right? Where like you
yeah,
see
yeah,
that he's already like you see him having run away from this like traumatic experience where I'm really trying to just like dangle in front of you what happened, right? As a
yeah,
reader, I
yeah,
want you thinking the entire chapter one, like, where the hell is this guy coming from? Because that's
yeah.
like the hook that gets you to read the rest of it. Um, but I do feel as well that another piece about like me being okay not having an agent. I had one of my ARC reviewers that I talked to about the book. They said, "Oh my God, I loved it so much. It was great." They were like, "I just want to warn you, you do have a little bit of like an ambiguous ending. So some people might not like that and might rate it a little bit lower." And in my mind, I'm like, I do not care whatsoever about like somebody giving it 3 stars instead of 4 because of the I'm like the ambiguous ending, in my view, is like chef's kiss perfect. Like if a
Yes.
literary agent ever told me you need to change this ending because people won't like the fact that it's a little ambiguous, that would drive me nuts. I would be like,
Well, I
I
mean,
can't change this ending.
it erodes the entire purpose of um the concept itself, right?
Yeah,
Which
the
is,
the the good versus evil like hinges on the ending of this book. But
yeah,
if people want to rate it a star less because it's open to interpretation, then they are more than welcome to do that.
yes. Um, yeah, so funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a book that ends. I don't actually think it ends ambiguously. It ends on sort of a decision for where my protagonist has made a decision, but she's presenting a decision to somebody else. And someone said, "Well, what happens?" And then I said, "Well, what do you mean? It doesn't matter what happens."
That's so for me.
The
So that's
point
like
is,
the new
why do you
school.
care? Why do you
That's
care
like
about this person you've just met when the person offering the decision is the one that you've carried on anyway?
Well,
It drives me crazy.
is that like a new school reading thing, like where everybody needs to have everything tied up in a neat little bow? Because like
No,
I'll tell you
no,
one thing that like
it's
90% of the books on that bookshelf, they don't get tied up in a neat little bow.
there it's the denouement. There's like a I think it's because everyone reads like teen and YA, and everyone all these adults write YA.
But even I could also say like I even think about like The Sopranos getting like crucified on that last episode because it cut to black. No, like like that was, I mean, how long ago was that? But that finale, I remember the internet going crazy about like how are you going to cut to
Yes.
black and not tell us what happens
I
when
mean, he dies. He gets assassinated and
I mean
dies.
that's I guess that's your interpretation.
Yeah, I think the more interesting. Well, we could talk about that Sopranos finale. By the way,
Yeah.
you can't see it behind me, but when I was thinking about becoming a screenwriter, I went and got the best Sopranos screenplays
Mm,
book
that's
because I
awesome.
figured if I was going to learn how to write like awesome, thoughtful, interesting screenplays, I should
Do you ever
just
think about just like rewrite, like just copying? Because that's what I know a lot of authors do. Just get one of your favorite books and just type it word for word just to get into that, like get into the flow. I know that's what a lot of people are
I
doing.
believe it or not, I never have a hard time coming up with ideas.
Yeah,
I've
yeah,
never in my life have I come up with concepts, and to me the only struggle is that the way I see them play out in my head is very visual.
yeah.
And so when I put them, I have to remember that when I articulate them, when I write them out, that the visual element is works in film, but
Mm.
doesn't work in literature.
So
And so
when you're writing, do you plot it out ahead of time or do you like there's that debate that's always on every writing website you ever see that's like plotter versus pantser. I don't know
I
where
don't
you
know.
fall. I don't know if you plot out.
I don't know what that would look like. I have a rough outline where I know kind of where I'm going. And if I get stuck, I just go for a walk or for a run and
Yeah,
think about it.
yeah.
And the solution always presents itself. I've never like had a time where that didn't sort of where that wasn't the case for me.
Yeah, I've never been one to outline. I trust my instincts first and foremost. Like when I'm putting a book together and I
Mhm.
have a concept, I have character like I'll do character maps, I'll figure out who these people are, I'll figure out what the big overarching idea of the book is. But
Mhm.
then I'm writing chapter one, and when chapter one is done, I'm thinking to myself, like, what's the best chapter two that I could write? And I
Mhm.
just make that all the way through a book until it exists at the end. And then I'll take a step back and look at it. And usually, what I look at after the first draft is a piece of crap. But that's when you go back and you start fine tuning it and oh, well, I didn't really express this well in chapter. Oh, this might be better off being moved to the end. But you can't do that unless like that'd be my number one piece of advice to anybody that wants to write a book is that like you can't edit what you don't have. Like it has to
Oh
exist.
yeah,
Like you have to
it
just
has to
write it
exist.
first. And there's a good chance that it's going to suck when you write it first, but then
Mhm.
you just make it better a little bit piece by piece. And that's
Yeah.
always been my process.
If I have any advice, well, there are two pieces of advice that I usually give, which is I rate a book. A book is automatically good if the action is clear and I want to keep reading.
Hmm.
So if the action is clear, so I know what's happening, because not a lot of books, even like professionally done books, is the action clear. And if I want to keep reading, it's good. The other one is when you try to sit down and write something, overcoming the shame of low expectations for yourself is the biggest hurdle. Uh, and it always was for me. I had wanted to write forever, forever, wanted to write a novel. And it literally took just telling myself that it's okay if I don't write the next LA Confidential.
Yeah. It's all right if
Because
it's not East
I,
of Eden.
yeah, it's not easy.
Yeah.
I always use LA Confidential because LA Confidential is so perfect. It has a
So
zillion characters. It has like an elaborate criminal plot line. And I just thought, if I can't write LA Confidential, then what the fuck am I even bothering to write for?
yeah,
And then
that's
I
so that's
realized I don't have to write LA
yeah.
Confidential.
It is so for yeah, that's East of Eden for me. Like you could see
Yeah,
it. It's right over here. It's right over my shoulder. That's the book that it's like to me, that's the book that every book I write for the rest of my life will just be like looking up to East of Eden and saying like I'm trying to be you like as best I possibly can because that's to me like the epitome of like perfection in a novel. I
interesting.
yeah, I I think it's so perfectly crafted and executed that like when I finished reading East of Eden, it almost felt like it was gonna like ruin other books for me, where I was like, I don't know if anything will ever be like this good. Another one, I know you talked about it on the pod before. Another one is Lonesome Dove, man. Lonesome Dove is another book that I'm like, wow, like what an experience Lonesome Dove is.
I've never read it. My wife, I bought it from my wife based on the fact that all the ladies are reading it. And I was like,
Yeah,
well,
she's
Liz
like
and
they're
I
talking
could
about
read the
horses a
same
lot,
book. My wife was like, there's
a
like a
lot about
whole pig
horses.
thing.
Yeah,
They're
total.
talking
Oh
about
yeah, two oh
pigs.
two pigs. Yep.
Yeah. And and she's like, there's a lot of pig stuff going on. But yeah, I mean, the other thing that I really think like really helps people is to look at rudimentary novels, novels that are structured in very simple ways that um Steinbeck's of Mice and Men.
Yeah, totally.
You basically get the
Old Man in the Sea.
introduction, Old Man in the Sea, introduction of the setting, followed by a conversation and action resolution.
Yeah,
Setting, conversation, action, resolution. And looking at a novel, it wouldn't occur to you to write a novel that way. But I mean, that's how Of Mice and Men is written.
yeah.
And really, if you look at that as a way to tell a story, it's a very effective way to tell a story, like a play. And it's very commensurate with our collective experience of watching film. And to my mind, if anyone ever wanted to start small, I would say read Of Mice and Men, look at the way Steinbeck um, articulates and structures each of the chapters, and then replicate it because that's an authentic way and a very excellent way, not only to show, not tell. I mean, it's a terrific way to teach people to show, not tell, um, but also a way to simplify the process and make it far less intimidating for people and to get
And
chapters down to what is essential in the chapter.
I think that's also that's I think a big that's a big hurdle is I think some people would view writing a novel as like it's so big and it's such a lofty task that the more I
Yeah,
think that you can simplify it and like the way that you just did, I think makes it feel like a more like accessible kind of art form. Right? Because I
yeah,
think a lot of people think like, oh, I could probably write a pretty good short story, but when you're looking at a novel, it feels big and lofty and ambitious, and I think people get kind of tripped up in that, like the idea that you need to string together 300 to 400 pages that are perfectly crafted in order to write a good book.
yeah.
But as you've just said, I think Of Mice and Men is a great example. I think Old Man of the Sea is a great example. I think The Pearl is a great example. I just recently read Train Dreams by Dennis Johnson. I don't know if you read that. It's
Well,
just
I
a
watched
great
the movie. I haven't read
to
the
watch
book.
them. Yeah,
Yeah.
a great example of like short fiction. Like the book is all of 95 pages. But it's like
Mhm.
really well crafted and really tells a great story. Um, and I think some people get tripped up that they think everything needs to be the length of the Bible when it doesn't have to be
Yeah,
Harry
well,
Potter.
they also think it needs to be like Stephen King,
Yeah,
you know, not realizing that Stephen King has edited that down from a 300,000 words to 140. And then
yeah,
his editor has chopped it to bits to keep his
yeah.
sentences reasonable, you know. So
Medusa went from 125 to 90.
yeah,
Yep.
I'll
It's just
be
some
honest.
you gotta know when to cut.
I tend to just instinctually end up with about 30 to 33 chapters at about 2,500 words a chapter,
Mm,
which puts me with everything I write sub 90.
mm.
I just the stories that I think about and contemplate just don't get that long.
Yeah,
You
that's
know
just
what I
how they
mean?
unfold. I know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So well, anyway, Kyle, great to talk to you, man.
Yeah, great to talk to you. I appreciate you having me on. Yeah, it's been a
Yeah,
lot of fun.
yeah. Plug Medusa and plug Whalers too.
Yeah, sure. So, uh, my second novel, Medusa or Men Entombed in Winter, it comes out to I don't know when this is gonna come out, but the it drops
Yeah.
tomorrow, um, the 24th of February. I really appreciate if you go check out my Goodreads page for it. Check out some of the reviews, um, and then my debut, Whalers. Right, that's another great book that you should definitely go take a look for. Um, Appreciate you having me. Thank you a lot.
Well, thank you, Kyle, for coming on. And Medusa is terrific. And I'm definitely gonna pick up a copy of Whalers. I'm just 9,000 books deep.
Yeah, aren't we all right? Yeah.
Kills me, man. Kills me. But anyway, Kyle, thank you for coming on the Dadlit Pod, and thanks for chatting about all these things.
Yeah, appreciate it, man. You stay warm. Have a great rest of your night, and we'll talk soon for sure.
Absolutely. Talk to you later. This has
All
been
right.
an episode of the Dadlit Pod.
Our time together has come to an end. It's time to return to your wife, kids, and friends. It's time to pick up those books you forgot while you wait for the next ad lit